Awesome. So yeah, this is our chance to share back some findings on our Mentoring in Canada research project. So we had a chance to interview both mentors and mentees about their experiences and perspectives of youth mentoring. And this is our chance to kind of share back the findings and give a little bit of an overview of what we heard from everyone and what we're planning to do with that to make sure that our research reaches people that can act on it. So we're excited to get a chance to kind of have things come full circle. So we were going to start with some introductions, but I think we don't have that many people on the call with us today. So we can maybe just do an introduction of our speaker, myself and Vero and Tracy, who are here from Mentor Canada. So my name's Jennifer. I did a lot of the interviews with the research participants, but not all of them. So I'm a research associate at SRDC, the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation. And yeah, Tracy and Vero, do you also want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'll go first. I'm Véronique Church-Duplessis. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation for Mentor Canada, and we're the ones behind the study. We commissioned it and hired SRDC to do the research for us. Tracy?
Thanks, Vero. I am Tracy Luca-Huger. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives. Vero and I have worked very closely together to ensure that informed research and evidence is brought to the field and to the sector of mentoring. So I was happy to participate in this research.
Awesome, yeah. And so we have just a little brief introduction of the organizations that we work for. The first one here, SRDC. So this is the organization that I work for. SRDC is a nonprofit research organization. We're a mission-driven organization. So all the kind of research projects that we're involved in, they all have this sort of social justice lens to them, and really the idea of how can we make a difference in the lives of Canadians who might be marginalized or facing exclusion, and just everything around this theme of, kind of making the world a better place, and how can we use high quality research and evaluation to achieve that. So we say we have a two-part mission, helping to identify policies and programs that improve the well-being of people, especially those facing a disadvantage, and then raising the standards of evidence used for selecting programs and policies. I'm based in Ottawa, but we have a team of researchers across Canada, and it's growing by the day. I think we have around 40 right now, but we're growing, and it's exciting to have more people come on board.
So I'll speak to Mentor Canada's mission and our origin. So we're a fairly new coalition of organizations that provide youth mentoring. We ourselves do not provide mentoring programs, but rather we work with organizations that provide youth mentoring programs across the country. We were created in 2019 and launched by Big Brothers Big Sisters of Canada, the Alberta Mentoring Partnership, and the Ontario Mentoring Coalition. And our mission really is to work together with our founding partners and other organizations and agencies in the youth mentoring sector, and any other stakeholder really of the youth mentoring sector, to build sector capacity. And at the end of the day, that will enable us to empower every young person to fulfill their potential. Right, so just to give you a bit of an overview of the research we commissioned SRDC to conduct for us, it was a three-part research project. The people attending this webinar today or viewing the recording participated either in part 1 or part 3 of this research project. So part 1 was mapping the gap. The goal was really to understand young people's experiences of mentoring when they were growing up, and help us understand who has access to mentoring, who doesn't, what are the barriers to access, and really what can we do better to make sure that every young person who needs a mentor gets the mentor they need at the right time. The second part of the research project was called Capturing the Landscape. This one really focused on organizations that provide mentoring programs and services across Canada. We wanted to understand the prevalence, scope, structure, strengths and challenges that mentoring programs across the country are facing at this time. And the third part is called Raising the Profile of Mentoring. This one really focused on adults' experiences as mentors to young people across the country, as well as their general opinions about the place of youth mentoring in our society. So we did a whole bunch of surveys and a whole bunch of interviews to gather this information, and we're nearing the completion of this project and are about to be able to share results with the rest of the field. Jennifer, back to you.
Yeah. Neat. I'm trying to think what the total sample size would be across all three, but we definitely in
over
the end spoke to
people who participated in one of these studies or another. It's quite big.
Yeah. So the part that we're talking about specifically today will be the qualitative results, which were just one component of that broader research program that Vero's describing there. So for each of the three parts, there was a survey component, and then for two of the parts, there were these additional qualitative components where we actually had in-depth interviews with people to ask them about their personal experiences and their sort of firsthand experiences and perspectives related to youth mentoring. So that's what I'll be. Oh, go ahead.
Jennifer, in terms of interviews, I think you talked about 40 people.
Yeah, I've got a little breakdown here I'll show between mentors and mentees, but in total it was about 40 conversations that we had over the spring and summer. And so what did we set out to investigate? What we were trying to do with these interviews? We did have some sort of overarching general questions that we wanted to understand from both the perspective of mentors and mentees. So we wanted to know a little bit more about the meaning of mentoring to people, especially how that might differ across cultures and contexts and sort of ages and stages of life. So that was something we wanted to investigate from both mentor and mentee perspectives. And then we wanted to know just about the dynamics of mentoring relationships. So how do mentoring relationships get started? What do they focus on? How long do they last? How do they come to an end? Just all of those sort of dynamics within a relationship. And the outcomes of youth mentoring, both for the mentees who receive the mentoring and the mentors who give the mentoring. So how does mentoring influence people's lives? What are their perceptions about the value of mentoring and what impact it can have? And then we did have some specific kind of things that we wanted to explore specifically with youth. We wanted to understand their barriers and facilitators to accessing a mentor. So what factors influence young people when it comes to accessing or developing a mentoring relationship while they're growing up? And what do youth want mentorship to focus on? So what are some of the things that are going on in their lives that a mentor could support them with? And then when we were speaking to mentors specifically, that's where we wanted to know a little bit more about their motivations and willingness to mentor, like what draws somebody in and brings them into mentoring. And what might be both a barrier or a facilitator to becoming a mentor or being a mentor. So what keeps people involved over time? And then in a more general sense, what are their perceptions and opinions about how mentoring fits into our society and what's the role of mentoring in Canada? So as Vera said, we spoke to almost 40 people. In total, there were 19 mentors and 18 mentees. The mentees were young people aged 18 to 30, currently living in Canada. We had 17 in English and 2 in French, and we had 12 women, 6 men, and one participant who identified as Two-Spirit when we were speaking to the mentees. And then amongst the mentors were adults 18 years of age or older who had previous experience either working or volunteering as a mentor for youth in Canada in a Canadian setting. And of those interviews, we had 16 conducted in English and 2 in French. And we had 5 men and 13 women. And they were really diverse age and backgrounds. We asked people just to self-identify, and they shared with us a whole range of diverse identities and lived experiences, which you see just kind of some of the terms and ways that people self-described here, which was really interesting to kind of hear a little bit more about the perspectives that people were coming from and how that influenced their mentoring experience. So most of the people that we talked to had formal mentoring experiences, but really in a range of contexts and settings. So formal mentoring experiences, through a structured program, often in a community-based agency. So some people had experience with faith-based mentoring, in-school mentoring, community-based mentoring, online e-mentoring, mentoring specifically for newcomers and immigrants to Canada, career-focused mentoring, and some people who had experience with Indigenous specific organizations and programs. So it was more common to have formal structured mentoring experiences, but we did hear from some people as well who had informal mentoring experiences that developed more naturally or organically outside of a particular structured program. And then amongst the youth and the young people that we spoke to, some had not had any mentoring experience, and we're just kind of looking back in hindsight on their childhood and adolescence and talking about the experiences that they went through and how mentoring could have played a role, or maybe some of the things that got in the way from them having a mentor during that time. And so, across almost 40 conversations, most of them were taking about 45 minutes to an hour. We ended up with a lot of material, a lot of really rich, interesting material. And then our challenge was, how do we synthesize this down so that it's, without losing like that rich, detailed information? How do we organize it and summarize it? And so we tried to first think about our original research questions and kind of going back to like what we set out to learn. What information had we heard from our interviews that could help answer those questions? We were trying to consider our audience. So knowing that kind of the Mentor Canada network, it's made up of a lot of service providers and programs that are providing mentoring. So we were trying to think of like, what had we heard from the interviews that could be actionable and could inform the work of those partner organizations. Then we were trying to look for those things that we heard a lot of, like the common themes that ran throughout all of the interviews, especially if it was something that both a mentor and a mentee had said. And then we were also on the lookout for any sort of like really unique comments that we might have only heard one time, but really stood out as an interesting and unique perspective that would maybe be new information. And we kind of funneled that all in and came up with some key themes and what I was calling salient quotes, or like quotes that really stood out to us. And that's what I'll share back with you guys today. So we kind of synthesized this into sort of tables and summaries to share back in a written report. And I've just kind of pulled a few of those key things today. So one of the first topics or themes that we wrote up about from our qualitative interviews were this idea of what is mentorship, how do you define it across culture, context, ages, and stages of life. So we had a lot of interesting metaphors that came out, and I would hear the kind of the same things over and over again. So the idea that a mentor is a sounding board, they take their mentee under their wing, they show a mentee their ropes, they're a role model, a connector, a networker, they lead by example, they're a safe place, they're a shoulder to lean on. So those are kind of some of the things that people would say when asked to describe what mentoring was to them. And then a kind of couple key themes came through. One was that it's intentional, that you set out to mentor, and that it's a deliberate, intentional action and relationship that you establish. And the importance of kind of constant, repeated connection. So a mentor needs to be accessible and available, and they need to spend that time with their mentee. They need to really get to know their mentee, and it has to be this kind of personal, lasting connection. I heard from both mentors and mentees the importance of having mentoring be a no judgment zone. So the idea that a mentor comes in with this sort of neutral perspective, they're an external perspective, and there's no authority or judgment wrapped up in that. So I heard this over and over again, like, I'm not a parent, I'm not a teacher, that's not my role, I'm not here to judge. This is just a safe place, a safe relationship with no judgment and no ulterior motive. So this idea that it was really genuine, a genuine willingness to help. You're not there for any other role, you're just there to focus on the individual, have fun together. And that was really important to youth too, that they said they saw their mentee or their mentor as holding this unique space where it was just a genuine connection, and nobody was trying to get something out of it. The idea that the mentee is the one leading the relationship in a way. So in that sense, I mean, like, a mentor doesn't come in with an agenda, they're not imposing their path on a mentee. It's really led by the youth. So they get to know the youth and then follow their lead and encourage them down their own pathway. I heard a lot about how a relationship should be reciprocal and bidirectional, so that both the mentor and the mentee should learn from each other, and that the relationship is beneficial to both of them, and it should feel that way. And it's not a one-sided relationship. And then we heard the importance of just trust, that's kind of the foundation of the relationship, this sort of genuine connection. Fun, I heard that a lot, that mentoring relationships are fun, and the time spent together was fun, and that it was personal, that it was really like the whole person involved and not just one aspect of their life. And here are a couple of quotes that I think stand out. A mentor is someone who's part of your journey. They don't care as much about what your destination is, but more so how you get there. It's just about showing up for the journey. And then we did hear from youth a little bit about how maybe we could come up with a better word. We got some youth that pointed out that maybe the word mentor is a little intimidating, but that we could kind of conceive of it as a touch point, a connection, or a friend. So that was some interesting kind of feedback as well about the power of language and thinking about the right term for these types of special relationships. And because we had such a diverse group of people who participated in our interviews, and we're kind of speaking from different cultural and contextual standpoints, we did reflect a little bit on that and have conversations about how mentoring looks different in different contexts. So I heard a lot about the importance of cultural competence, having mentors who can acknowledge the lived experiences of their mentees, even if those experiences include things like racism and intergenerational trauma, how important it is to have mentors who are prepared and understanding of that, and are reflective of the mentee as well. We heard about how mentoring can look different in some cultures in terms of the role of mentoring within family and parent relationships. So some of the young people I spoke to talked about how they see their parents as mentors, and that's a big source of mentoring in their life, and that how mentoring external to the family would be less common, and in some cases discouraged, because it's seen more as the role of a parent or the role of a family member. And we talked a lot about how culture shapes the way that adults and young people relate to one another. So we had some conversations about how in some cultures, those relationships are more task-oriented. And like a parent telling you to do your homework or something, and that's what your conversation is focused on, is that task. And just how that then shapes the way a young person relates to an adult overall. So we had some really kind of interesting conversations around all of those dynamics. One thing that I heard a lot of from young people was the idea of allowing them to self-select into a mentoring program that they identify with and that works with their culture. So not forcing a young person into a particular type of mentor program, for example. This was something I heard when speaking to people who identified as in part of an Indigenous community. They were saying, don't just assume that a young person who's Indigenous wants to be an Indigenous specific mentoring program. In fact, it should be much more normalized and offered to everybody. And in fact, that cross-cultural mentoring could be a really positive thing, and that people were keen to learn about culture and language from their mentors, even if it was a different culture or language from their own, that this could be something that they could share cross-cultural. We did hear a lot about how mentoring is consistent with Indigenous ways of knowing, and that this is a real strength of it, that in Indigenous communities, the idea of like raising children learning from their neighbors and other community members and that kind of thing, that's a really well-established way of raising children in Indigenous communities, and that's being revitalized by mentoring. So we heard about, sharing cultural teachings, spending time on the land, that was important in Indigenous programs around mentoring. Some people were coming from a faith-based mentoring perspective, and we heard about how faith-based settings are an opportunity for people to come together. There's already a structure in place. There's already there's a kind of potential for mentoring to help with the moral and spiritual development of youth. Even if youth are coming into a different community or society, and how to reconcile and observe their faith in a different society. That was a theme that we heard that came out that mentoring can help with. A few of our participants were newcomers and were speaking specifically about their needs as recent immigrants to Canada, and how they saw mentorship as a big help and asset to them in settling in a new community. And the importance of having mentors who could help them improve their language skills, for example. And then we also heard a little bit about how mentoring could be more inclusive for people who are differently abled, both mentors and mentees. So ways that mentoring programs could advertise in an inclusive way, celebrate the contribution of both mentees and mentors who may have different abilities, and show everyone that they're welcome. And it was interesting to talk about the potential for e-mentoring as an option that might be more inclusive for some people. And just the value overall of having youth see people with various abilities and how important that was to be really inclusive and how beneficial it was. So here's a quote that I think touches a little bit on some of the cultural and contextual considerations overall that we heard. Sometimes when you talk to people who come from a different background, it can feel that they're invalidating your experience. So I like having people who are aware of that diversity and embrace that diversity. When we spoke to mentors and we're asking them a little bit about their motivations to mentor and becoming a mentor, this was really an interesting conversation, because on the one hand, we were hearing a lot that like anybody can be a mentor, and that it's important to recognize that you don't have to be some like finished product in order to have something valuable to share with the youth, that you can be, you know, anywhere along like your career pathway, for example, or your own journey, and still have something to share back with youth, and that's important to recognize and celebrate. But at the same time, that it is very important for mentors themselves to be healthy and supported. Otherwise, they might not be in the best space to provide support to a young person. So this was something we talked a lot about, and recognizing that it's maybe not an easy answer, but that it's important to recognize that there's some groups of mentors that might not be far enough along in their healing journey to become a mentor or to share back with young people. So this is a really kind of interesting, nuanced discussion a little bit about who a mentor is. But we heard from both youth and mentors some of these kind of like key characteristics like integrity and being genuine, and sort of this moral character and how important that was overall in a mentor. And then when it came to the motivations and why someone was drawn towards mentoring, sometimes it was because there was a space in their own life. Like we heard from some people who didn't have children, and this was a way to be in touch with young people that they liked. Sometimes we heard from people whose identities were kind of shifting in retirement, and this was an important way as well to kind of fill that space when they were moving on from their careers. The most common thing, though, across almost all the conversations I had was just how people were striving to make a difference and wanted to give back, and they saw mentoring as that way of doing that. So that they loved kids, that they wanted to have fun, they recognized a need in their community, they saw themselves reflected in a young person's situation, that they realized the power to make a difference, and they wanted to share the benefits that they themselves might have experienced as well, having received mentoring. They wanted to give that back to others. And in terms of the role of mentoring in our society, we heard a little bit about how just people see Canadian society at this current moment, that we're often disconnected and that families are really busy, parents lack time, and that mentoring is sort of this way of adults in a community coming together to support a youth, and like this idea of it takes a village. We heard that reflected a lot in the interviews. So I think some of these quotes here kind of illustrate that. If we want to improve society, we need to look closely at the development and nurturing of our youth, and mentoring is a big part of that. Personal character, moral character, values. That's the essence of leadership, mentorship. The person you're mentoring has to be able to look up to you somehow. That's the currency of the mentorship. So kind of thinking of those things that it's important for a mentor to embody those characters and values. So when it comes to accessing a mentor, we heard from young people about some of the things that can get in the way and make it harder. One thing was the lack of awareness. We just heard a lot of young people reflecting back on their time growing up and saying, I didn't know that these programs were there, or I hadn't heard about mentoring. I didn't know that that was an option. So there was still a lack of awareness, and especially if they thought that their parents weren't aware as well. So perhaps if their parents were newcomers, for example, that was shared in some of the interviews, that they thought maybe their parents hadn't heard of these types of programs, and that stood in the way of them becoming aware of them as well. And then we did hear about these sort of persistent myths and misconceptions about mentoring when young people were reflecting back, they were saying, oh, I thought mentoring was like daycare or babysitting, or I thought it was like about tutoring or guidance. I thought it was therapy or counseling. And this kind of perception that mentoring was only for people on the extremes, that like either you got a mentor because you were excelling, like one young person used the example of being on a hockey team. And like if you were the first string player and you were like a star on the hockey team, then maybe your coach would pick you out to be someone that they would mentor. So it's because you were the star of the team that you got a mentor. But then on the flip side, there was a lot of people who talked about how they thought mentoring was just for people who were struggling, and that it kind of came with that stigma. And they had this misconception that mentoring was only for people who were getting in trouble or were having issues, and that was why they got a mentor. And so we still heard a lot about the need to kind of overcome some of those misconceptions and the stigma around it. And that some youth were sort of suspicious or skeptical about it, and that parents were too. So young people, we heard a lot about how they were suspicious of people's motives. They were kind of really wary of the idea of a transactional relationship. And as a young person, that they might have been averse to sort of like authority figures or adults in their life. And then a whole lot of people shared as well about like the shame and stigma around help seeking and feeling like they might not have want to have reached out. That's one of the quotes here that I pulled in from a young person who said, I probably would have never reached out for help because I thought it was taboo. Like if you're reaching out for that kind of stuff, it's because in the sense that there's something wrong with you. So how to overcome that, and sort of suggestions of how mentoring programs could overcome those barriers, was this whole idea of normalizing mentoring through a universal approach. So just offering it to everyone as much as possible, and not targeting or aiming it at a specific group, just making it as available as universally as possible. Often through school programs was one of the suggestions that I heard a lot, that if it was just anybody at that a particular age could reach out and have a mentoring option. And this idea of a light touch introduction. So there was kind of a lot of back and forth with the young people I spoke to who are saying, yes, it helps to have like a little bit of something to help get the relationship off the ground. So like maybe bringing people together around a fun group activity, and that could be an option of how they connect to a mentor, or even like a small gesture. Like one youth shared a really neat example of like receiving a card during Pride Week, and it was like a nice gesture, a way that a mentor reached out to her. So some of those sort of small light touch introductions, those are great. But then beyond that, they didn't want programs to be too formal or too rigid or too forced. They wanted it to be like, here's a starting point, but then let it develop naturally from there. So I heard that a lot. And sort of ways to foster that trust in the early stages was important. So reaching out to parents or guardians was one way of fostering trust off the hop. And both from mentors and mentees, we heard that the reality is that there are sort of some stigmas, some concerns around boundaries, stranger danger. I heard that phrase a couple of times, and that can be a deterrent on both ends. So we need to give thought to how to create safe spaces where both mentors and mentees feel like they can enter the space and start to connect with each other. When it's working well, when a mentoring relationship is hitting its mark and it's working, we heard that it looks like a good match. Lots of opinions on what a good match is. It could be a match based on language, culture, gender, sexual orientation, your career field or program of study, newcomer status, passions, interests, coming from the same local community, or just kind of in general, you could be matched on your background. We heard all these different things of like what might constitute a good match. But then at the same time, we heard, you know what, it kind of doesn't matter in a lot of cases. It's just whether you have a good fit person to person. And that in some cases, yes, maybe you want to be similar on some things, but that also you can celebrate the differences between a mentor and mentee, and sort of like learning from each other and like learning from someone's life experience. So there wasn't really like an overwhelming preference amongst the group of people that we spoke to. It was like very individual. The people, some wanted a similar mentor-mentee match, some wanted something different. And then some said, it depends. It just really, we can't predict it. It just depends. So one thing that did come through then was like this idea of choice and flexibility. And yes, providing a loose structure for mentoring to happen in, but not getting too weighed down by that structure, and just allowing a mentee and a mentor to evolve as in a natural way. And it was kind of a similar story around like, well, what does the relationship focus on, or what do you do together? It was like, honestly, anything, it just matters that we do it together. So spending time on a wide range of activities. And it was funny to hear a little bit about how like the simple things shine through. Like one mentee talked about like a trip to the hardware store, like just running errands with her mentor was nice, or going for a walk, sharing a meal together, just this idea of like enjoying each other's time together. And the mentee wants to feel that the mentor is enjoying their time as well, that it's that bi-directional thing, that you're doing something together and that it's fun for both of you. We did hear that in an ideal relationship, it's really important to have healthy boundaries and those kind of like safe spaces. So mentors talked about the work that it takes to maintain healthy boundaries, sometimes like, not feeling bad or guilty when time is up to leave. Like that was one thing I heard about. Sort of the boundaries, like when a young person might be testing you early in the relationship, and maintaining boundaries during that time. And that like resisting the taking on a parent role, like maintaining that boundary that you're a mentor, you're not a parent, and that's important. And from the youth side, they talked about boundaries as well, and things like following through on promises. They wanted their mentor always to do what they said they would do, and that was really important. And then the last kind of point that we heard, that in an ideal relationship, an ideal mentoring relationship, the mentors themselves have to be really well supported. So, having on-call support for a mentor, if something comes up, if there's crisis with their mentee, that there's someone there for them, that's a big part of maintaining those healthy boundaries as a mentor, is not making sure that you have backup support to come in if needed in a crisis. And being part of a community as a mentor. So having that kind of individual one-on-one relationship nested within a broader community or a broader network of other mentors, that could be really helpful and powerful. Yeah, and I like this quote here, just getting together, just having that time together. It's a break from everything else. You get to learn something, you learn something new, and then just take it with you. And it's a restful time. I like that idea of it being restful, because I think that reflects like that idea of like a really safe, comfortable space that's created in the relationship. So definitely that it wasn't all roses. We did hear a little bit about the challenging parts of mentoring that needed to be kind of addressed to and prepared for. So we did hear sometimes that there were like mismatches between a mentor and mentee. It just wasn't a good fit, and how to kind of recognize that and navigate that in a relationship. That the early stages of like initiating the relationship and building that trust is kind of tricky. So like how to reach out, like a lot of mentors were a little bit reluctant about how do they reach out and initiate a relationship. And then I heard that as well from young people who were saying like, oh, I don't want to be bugging my mentor. I don't want to be, I'm kind of second guessing my role in terms of like reaching out to somebody. There was a bit of that power dynamic sometimes there that people talked about. So that can be tricky about getting the relationship off the ground. And that's why it's helpful to have a little bit of like support or like that light touch help at the beginning to get things off the ground. And then this kind of trust building phase, that it takes time, you can't rush it. And it has to be a genuine kind of slow growth to build that trusting relationship. That communication and confidentiality can be tricky. So some of the mentors I talked to spoke about how you're kind of walking this fine line. You might not always have all of the information about a young person or their family, and that it's important to have like open lines of communication between the youth, the mentor, their family, their teachers, and other supports in their life, that was important. Mental health came up both in the conversations with young people and with mentors. Sometimes it's hard for youth to access mentoring when they're going through a difficult time with their mental health. And it's also hard for a mentor perhaps to navigate if a young person's going through a crisis with their mental health. And there needs to be support and things in place in a program to offer additional help during that time. And then we did hear this theme of like for mentors that it's important for them to be looking after their own mental health as well, and not wanting to kind of transfer any issues onto a young person, right? That they need to be healthy and well supported on their end in order to be a good support to a young person. Time commitments was one we heard, both young people who are busy with sports and school and activities, and the same with mentors, trying to fit mentoring into their schedule, that was kind of an inherent challenge. And then, of course, the pandemic. We talked a little bit about that without getting too far into it, but in a lot of my conversations, this was reflected as this was such a big curveball in their mentoring relationships, and that they were kind of navigating through how to move online or having breaks in their mentoring, and sometimes mentoring relationships that had ended abruptly and had been difficult to kind of navigate with the pandemic. I do like this quote, though, about how facing challenges, but that is kind of something to be embraced and overcome. So when you've been through it and you see the youth go off course, and it's about how to bring them back in a way that doesn't push them away from you, that has to be done through wisdom, kindness, warmth, sometimes humor. I enjoy that aspect. So my last kind of slide here that I have is about the impact. Why do we do this? Why is this important? And what flows from mentoring, both for young people and for the people who provide mentoring? This is really nice to hear. And obviously, yeah, really a highlight of our conversations was mentees like sharing some of the impacts that they'd had. They were saying, having a mentor can really foster personal growth, increase your confidence, push you to reach your potential. Mentors can inspire and motivate you, can improve your social skills, increase your ability to help seek and to go out and to find resources when you need them. As a newcomer, it can help you settle in a new community, lead to better decisions, give young people lessons and tools to carry with them throughout their life. And then for mentors, yeah, just speaking really highly of the positive experiences that they had had as well. It's a chance to make an impact. It brings youthful energy into your life. You're doing fun activities. It's rewarding, helpful, feels good. It's a positive experience, inspiring. You develop a sense of community. As a mentor, that you improve your transferable skills, like your people skills, your communication, your conflict resolution, that's an important thing. And that, yeah, you're kind of overcoming things in your own life, and it's a growth journey for the mentor as well. And these were some of my quotes that I picked out. There were some really nice heartwarming quotes, but I like this idea of one mentee who shared that her mentor taught her songs on the piano and that she still remembers them 18 years later and still plays them to cheer up. I thought that was kind of nice thought. One mentor who said seeing his face light up, like seeing her mentee's face light up, was the highlight for her. And just that mentoring nurtures my spirit and enriches my life. So yeah, some really nice positive stories shared about the nice influence and impact that it can have. So yeah, we were hoping that sharing back some of these findings could be a way of kicking off a discussion. And I know we don't have a lot of attendees here today. A lot of you will just be maybe checking this out by recording, but just kind of this invitation that, you know, it's an open invitation to be a part of this discussion as we move forward, and that we're still interested in hearing thoughts and reactions to these findings. We want to make sure we got it right. We want to hear about new ideas and next steps. So there are kind of, you know, questions to keep in mind if you want to weigh in as things move forward. But just this idea of what's resonating, what might be missing still, what might be surprising, and then where to go next with this research. So I think maybe let's just persist to the end, and then we'll stop the recording and have the discussion offline, if that works. Yeah. But yeah, these are kind of the discussion questions that we're hoping to get started and sort of percolate in people's minds. And I'll turn it over to you guys, Tracy and Vero, about the next steps.
Sure, thank you. One of the ways you can stay involved is indeed by getting in touch with us to share your thoughts about those reflection and discussion questions that Jennifer just mentioned. So please do look us up online, go to mentoringcanada.ca, and you can find Tracy and I in the our teams section, so you'll have all of our contact information, and you can find us there. I could give you my email, but nobody would remember it because it's quite long and complicated. So really the easiest thing to do is to go to mentoringcanada.ca and find us in the team section. And then we have some other areas of our work that are really taking off, and I think these are great opportunities for people to get involved. Tracy, do you want to talk about the connector?
Yeah, absolutely. Mentor Connector is an opportunity for young people, but also individuals who are interested in becoming part of a formal mentoring program. So both young leaders and youth from across Canada, as well as other individuals who are interested in becoming a mentor or a mentee, can search the database, the Mentor Connector database, based off of your postal code or your program interest, to look for mentoring opportunities in your community or to look for virtual mentoring opportunities. So we encourage our attendees today and anyone watching and listening in that if you're interested in becoming involved in mentoring, either to seek out a mentor or to become one, to go to Mentor Connector. We continue to expand that database of mentoring opportunities across Canada.
Yeah, and I think there's also an opportunity, even if you're not necessarily looking to become a mentor and volunteer with a formal mentoring program across the country, to let us know who is missing in our Mentor Connector. We've only been populating the database since, I think, October, Tracy. I don't remember exactly when we kicked it off, but we know that from our service providers survey that I mentioned at the beginning, that there are hundreds of mentoring programs across the country. And at this point, we think that not everybody is in the connector yet. So if you know of initiatives and programs in your area and you can't find them in the connector, let us know about it and we'll reach out to them and see if we can get them on board. My colleague Michael's email is there. He's the one in charge of populating the connector. So if you find anything or want to let us know about any program, any great program in your area, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Great. I think we could talk about our power of mentoring events too as another way of getting involved. Tracy?
Mentor Canada has initiated opportunities for young leaders across the country, ages 18 to 24 years old, to build connections and to build out social networks of support with private sector employees. So these are facilitated by Mentor Canada. We have a number of private sector partners, including Deloitte, RBC, Starbucks, Pearson Airport, that contribute as mentors in 90-minute facilitated conversations to explore career opportunities, career readiness, pathways to career opportunities, as well as post-secondary. And so if you're interested in building connections with the private sector and to explore career opportunities, we encourage you also to go to our website and to sign up as a young leader in Power of Mentoring events. There is no restriction on where you live. There is no restriction on how many you can participate in. They really are wonderful opportunities for you to build your network, but also to bridge some connection. And I think that that links really nicely to the research that SRDC conducted, that it really is about making connections. And so these are wonderful opportunities for you to make some of those connections with highly skilled professionals at various levels of their career path and journey.
And Vera, we did have the email address there too. Yeah, just as a final note, yeah, to thank you for your time, for participating in the study, and if you're tuning into the webinar, for hearing back about the results and thinking this through and being a part of the project. And yeah, just an invitation to get in touch to kind of further the discussion, or if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, there's the info there.
Yes, thank you. I forgot I wrote it down there. As you can see, the email is quite complicated. So thank you everyone who participated and contributed to this research. And we look forward to hearing from you in the future through one or another of our initiatives. We're a very dynamic new organization, well, initiative, and we hope that you will want to stay connected with us. So please reach out. I'll stop the recording now and we can move to the discussion.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.